And we're live. Oh, we've been live for 15 seconds.
It's always my
Boy.
favorite.
All right.
That's always my favorite.
We're just getting on the everything. How's everybody doing? How's everybody doing? If anybody's joined yet. Yeah. Hi everyone.
Somebody's watching. Maybe it's us. Sometimes my old parents need a reminder. Hey, old parents.
All right. Ah, well, we're here. We just got back.
3 people. Hello.
Heyo, all of you friends out there in Radio Land.
Podcast land. What do I do with this? Hey,
Um,
can you beat it?
I think it's like it looks like a Minnie Mouse.
Can you beat it?
Oh, I hope folks are watching right now. How's that?
No.
It's like a bow.
But not up, like a two. Weird pose. Hello, Mom. Hello, Mom. um, did you find your mom? Hello,
I
Mom.
think I've liked that when parents are on social media,
There we go.
they will often sign off as themselves. Like my mom does that too. She's like she'll comment on a post, and she comments, like something about the weather on a post that I posted about, my vacation or something, and she'll be like, "The weather's great here. Love, your mother, Marianne." And it's like I know I see the little profile. I know that's you, Mom.
It's Mom. I mean, it just gets better. Parents are awesome. Hey,
They are awesome.
They are awesome. We got to talk to your mama today.
Yeah, we did. We did. You all right there?
No, I'm choking. First of all, I'm choking on dinner. Second of all, I always choke right before the show.
Yeah, it's no joke. You choke. Do you have questions for me tonight?
What are we talking about?
We're talking about waves.
No, we're not.
Do you have questions for me tonight?
I do. We're just waiting a minute for folks to join.
Lots of people are joining.
How many?
We've got like
thousands.
We've got
in the hundreds of thousands.
In the hundreds of thousands of viewers right now. It's pretty amazing.
Awesome.
And yeah, look at that. Yeah, there's people joining.
Hey.
Yeah. So what are your questions?
So
we're 3.5 minutes into it. 4 minutes.
We're just the famous people take their time.
Right.
And I know that we don't have the luxury.
We're famous.
Yeah, we already lost somebody. I don't know that we have the luxury of taking our time like that because people lose interest, but we're also practicing having a famous podcast.
We do have a famous podcast.
Well, we do have a famous podcast, but we're practicing being famous.
Yeah.
In the podcast.
So,
hey, y'all.
I know. I'm so excited for everybody that's joining.
All right. So you seem to want me to jump in.
Yeah, what's up?
Mm-hmm. So first,
just keep going right there.
First thing,
no distractions.
I want to talk about is honey badgers.
So honey badgers don't give up.
Beep, 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 beep. Honey badgers don't give a cuss, and part of that, most people watching probably know about the honey badgers. There's a great. So David Attenborough does, right?
I don't think it's David Attenborough, but
yeah. You don't think it's him who narrates it?
I think that's the whole funny thing is that it's just some guy narrating.
Got it.
David Attenborough's way too classy to have done that.
Except for he did the Adele thing.
Yes, he narrated Adele's thing, but that's classy. That's classy.
Yo, I have way too much bang. I had to go to the eye doctor, which I hate going anywhere other than my front yard during COVID, and I had to go to the eye doctor today, and she's like, "Oh my God, your hair looks so good." I mean, we always talk about style, and I was like, "Oh gosh, thank you."
Yeah.
It's nice to get a compliment when you're running on hair fumes, because that's what's important right now. Bombing this one. Okay, so, I mean, seriously. Okay, so we talked about honey badgers because we just came back from the beach. It was awesome. It felt very safe. We were not with any, like, we weren't like around anybody, but we saw a bunch of honey badgers.
Can you explain to the audience what you mean by that? Because
most of the people, I'm assuming, have seen the honey badger video. If not, just like Google honey badgers.
Badger.
Yeah, the
just
honey
Google
badger.
Honey badger.
And you'll see the video about like how brave these honey badgers are and how they don't give a cuss. And nobody in South Carolina gave a cuss. We saw
about COVID.
Yeah, we saw about 2 masks total. And like again, we weren't wearing them on the beach, but like in the gas station, everywhere we looked, people were just in and out without any kind of mask. And
yeah. I mean, it was pretty incredible. Like they didn't, it was
far
different from the reality that we have been living in.
Yeah, and they were like crossing paths and touching each other's
hanging
dogs
out
and then getting close, and then there were like groups of like 20. There's a lot.
Yeah.
A lot of Trump signs. There's a lot going on.
Yeah.
Bunch of honey badgers.
Bunch of honey badgers.
All right. Next is on the way home. We, Google knows what to feed me, and it feeds me Bachelor news. And, if you all don't know yet, we are huge Bachelor fans.
We are part of Bachelor Nation, yes.
100%. We are the nation.
Part of it, yeah.
And then we, one of the Bachelor news things was, if you watch, a couple seasons ago, this woman named Becca was the Bachelorette. She got horribly dumped by Ari when Ari chose her because she was awesome, but he chose her because he felt pressured to. He broke up with her. They filmed the whole thing live. He picked Lauren. It actually turns out that he's a dope. Lauren's all right, and they made a great family. They have children now, times 2, and they're pregnant.
It's awesome. Yeah.
And then Becca ends up as the Bachelorette and picks not the person you'd want her to pick of the 2. We were all floored. The whole world was floored. And especially because as outsiders, we were privy to information that she was not privy to, which is that he really liked, he was like big time friends with and a liker of a bunch of white supremacist posts, like bad stuff, like really, really, really overt stuff. Which,
and of course, that came out on social media.
It came out on social media early on, so I was like never a fan of this dude.
Yeah.
And she picks him. Like after the whole season, he's the one. And then all of a sudden, like Adam and I are talking through it, and we're like, okay, he reminds her of her dad who had passed away. There was like some familiarity and all this kind of some sweetness. And they addressed after the final rose, they addressed that Becca was like, this, when I found out about this, when the show was over, it was not okay. We had a lot of discussion about it. I do not condone this. And then he made a public statement about it. And they talked through it. And I was like, you know what? I certainly don't agree with him, but I appreciate that A, they addressed it, and B, that they're just going to work through stuff. I mean, not everything we've done is kosher.
You don't have to have the same political views as your partner to get married.
Right.
Yeah. I mean, you need to have the same I think you need to have similar ethics and values about life. It really helps.
I don't think it's a thing. That really helps. Yeah.
But, anyway, so it's good that they were going to work it out, so.
But she was like, I think at that time, wasn't she like a Hillary supporter or had campaigned?
Doesn't matter,
Yeah, I mean, like she had, it was during the Hillary time. And so that was a pretty, it really kind of boiled down to their ethics and values. And so, well, she does a podcast called Happy Hour with Rachel Lindsay, who was the first Black
Bachelorette,
but also like the first Black person to make it anywhere to the end of any season ever. And she made it pretty close to the end of the season she was on that she wasn't picked on, and then she was the first Black Bachelor or Bachelorette.
Yep.
And so Bachelor Nation is doing a lot right now to kind of diversify, and it's very reactive. It doesn't feel very genuine. They've already just like picked this guy to be the next Bachelor. He's Black, and so anyways, of course, them, like I know you're getting tired of hearing me.
No,
okay.
No, it's a good story.
Okay,
Go for it.
that, this whole Bachelor Nation, they have so much influence over, I'm assuming United States and maybe beyond, but they have so much influence over folks. And
popular culture.
Thank you. They are talking about current events. And so there's one woman, her name's Becca Martinez. She was like 5 when she joined the show. She didn't make it because Ari was 55 when he was on the show and he didn't pick her. And she's kind of since gone like off the grid a little, but not really. Anyways, she's kind of since like become like this figure for somebody who's not very much like the Bachelor Nation or the Bachelor contestants. Like growing her armpit hair out. She's now got 2 babies with her boyfriend. It's all like all this stuff. She made some statements. She doesn't fit the mold. Thank you. She made some. Please continue to simplify what I'm saying because it's helpful. Yeah. She made some statements.
I'm playing your hype storyteller right here.
Excellent. Thank you.
Yeah. Helping folks stay up with it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I think we're all right.
Yeah, we're great.
Okay.
Great. I'm having a great time.
Okay, cool. So Becca,
let go of that.
I am feeling
let go of that. Yeah, let go of that self-consciousness.
Okay.
Just tell your story. So this is who we are. Becca, this is our podcast. We can talk whatever the heck we want to talk about.
Totally true.
Yeah.
So Becca says some stuff about the abolition of the police.
Yeah.
And there's a lot of conversation about reform versus abolition and how reform is still very whitewashed in the sense that it's looking to try to take a system that is inherently broken and, kind of like lightly
make it better.
Yeah, lightly or majorly, depending on your stance, but kind of fix it, right? Like, let's just fix it.
Right.
Well, if you listen to folks who are oppressed by the police system, what you'll hear is like, you really got to do away with it. And you got to do away with it because it's inherently broken and you can't actually fix it because it's just the basis of it is so broken. And that's that kind of foundational understanding is so true for so many things. It's like if the foundation of your house is cracked to smithereens, it really doesn't do a lot for very long
to change the trim on your doors.
Exactly. You really kind of just need to go to the foundation and muck it up and start fresh. And so what so people are speaking out about that. Lots of people. This is
that just occurred to me, like, and we'll get back to the Bachelor story, but we talk a lot about relationships on this podcast, and I've talked a lot about throughout the course of the time that the foundation of the relationship is so utterly important, and not necessarily the foundation like your first experiences within the first like 3 months of knowing each other. It's actually like what you have built the relationship on, and what value systems, what measurements of growth, like what are you at your root of your relationship really connected to each other at that level. And I think that's an interesting thing to explore because it's just a way in which the foundation, and I think a lot of potentially, and I'm guessing here, fully vulnerable, just guessing, but I think a lot of relationships that don't work for at least a longer period of time don't have any sort of strong foundation. Like they're based in something that is somewhat weak or shaky, like lust, or like we're together because we're great dancers together, and like it's great to be a good dancer with each other, but like is that a foundational element of a relationship? And at dancing, but you know what I mean.
I'm hearing what you're saying. It's like what makes a foundation, and that's going to be different for everybody, but it is.
If it's shaky and built on muck, if it's built on shaky ground, it's going to be really hard because you can only put so many coats of fresh paint on it.
And you're going to just have to rebuild it, period. Like,
right.
In order for it to sustain, you're going to have to rebuild it. And a lot of people do. They get together for whatever reason, but then they build, like, whether you're building the foundation to start with or later on, doesn't matter.
Yeah.
But the foundation has to be built.
Right.
So that's interesting. So Becca Martinez says, cuss the police. This is what needs to happen. And Duder retorts, then the other Becca, who was the Bachelorette, her fiance, which again was the one we didn't want, who had supported this white supremacist crazy.
I love the fact that we're talking about white supremacy, the policing system through the lens of the Bachelor.
Well, this is what makes the whole thing.
I mean, this is the most reading aloud conversation ever. Yeah.
It also makes it pretty palatable because
yeah.
we're all like hearing a lot and inundated. Yeah. So I think talking about the Bachelor makes it really interesting.
Yeah, of course.
So his name's Garrett. So Garrett says, in other words, Becca, you are no longer invited. You can no longer come over.
Yeah.
That's what he says. You can no longer come over. To which everybody's like, whatever, there's COVID, nobody's coming over anyways. But basically, she's been banned from his life. But Becca, his fiance Becca, they're really close, and it's just not going to work. So anyways, now Becca, his fiance, is saying, it's unfortunate they have the same name, is saying that
keep going, yeah.
that she is really disturbed by some of his comments, which I'll share a few more, and their relationship is on the rocks. Okay, so all that, the framework. But during so he posted a real, like...
So basically, he said he exiled another member of the, like, Bachelor community out because they made some comments that he disagreed with about the police and the comments that he made.
His original comments were... I guess this is like kind of a trend, the thin blue line, but his original comment is that I have a lot of police officers in my life, so I'd be remiss not to support these people who are humans. At the end of the day, they're humans with good intentions, and they're the ones that have been employed to support us, and I just want to continue to support them. In all of that, there's a lot of misunderstanding about what the whole point of this movement is, and how jumping to the defense of the police officers is really missing the point, because of course they're humans, and of course there are some lovely people that work for the police department, of course, and I know so many as well. That's not the point. It's about the dismantling of the structure, and both whether you're in it or out of it, like understanding what the structure has meant, like how it was designed, what it means, and what it's meaning for people.
Right. I had a thought about this today about like understanding how a structure is flawed. I think all of us have probably had an instance where we are, calling a company or at a thing. I'm at an auto dealership or something like that, and their whole system of doing things sucks. It's terrible. It's terrible, and at the same, and you're upset at that. You're like, you need to rework this because it doesn't work for anybody. And yet at the same time, you're like, that the person you're talking to or the person on the other end of the phone, they might be a good customer service agent or they might be a bad customer service agent. But when we try to deal with the health insurance company, it's like that whole thing is screwed up. And sometimes you get a bad customer service, but it doesn't matter whether that customer service agent is good or bad. That's not the point. The point is the whole system that we're trying to interact with to file a claim or to do this is screwed up. And so you need to actually rework that system to make it a difference. It isn't about the individuals on the other end of the phone.
And in this instance,
whether
it's
they're
not
doing
about
their job correctly or not.
It's about starting over from
exactly.
Scratch.
So that was just a thing, like a experience.
It's a great other example so that people can stop freaking out, because everybody's freaking out because they want security And security is so inherently valuable to us. And so when people need security and the police, they've been told their whole life is security,
Right.
then certain people have been told it's security. Others have been reminded that it's not very secure for them. But if you are somebody who's been told it is the security, then you can't even hear this because it's so scary to think about not having security.
Right.
So when you're talking about health insurance or the cell phone company or something that everybody can pretty much agree with is bunk and always going to bother you,
Right.
then everybody's like, oh, that's an interesting comparison.
Right.
Yeah,
Right.
that's an interesting comparison.
Well, it's just, I often use when talking about like, understanding political conversations or policy, one thing that frustrates me is people that try to like define a political party or a whole ideology based on like a meme, or like things that they read off the internet. And it's like, if you think about like an auto mechanic or like trusting doctors in terms of the pandemic, like I wouldn't just trust, like I trust a person who is trained in that field to provide an expert opinion, rather than like just Joe off the street who kind of diagnoses it. Now, I think as I say that, I recognize that there's some inherent difficulties with that, because especially when somebody is trained in a certain way to view things a certain way, and so we need to break those molds. But I think generally speaking, it's like, you listen to people who are experts in a certain area, and right now we get a lot of opinions off people who don't actually know anything about, like,
anything.
Democracy.
Yeah. Democracy.
Yeah.
So we've got Becca and Garrett. All right.
Yeah.
And so
if anybody is still actually following.
Yeah, of course they are. Of
Yeah.
course they are. And so, Garrett basically does the thin blue line thing,
Right.
and wants to just like really lift up his family and friends who are police officers. And so Becca, the other woman, not his fiance, says, it's not so much about intent as it is about impact.
Mm-hmm.
So the intention of somebody can be great, but if they hurt, then if the impact is negative, then that's what matters. And I think that that's so important. As somebody who, as a woman, like this is my only experience because I'm white, at least white passing, and have had very little discrimination about the fact that I'm biracial. But, as somebody, my biggest experience with any kind of oppression is in being a woman. And, there's so many microaggressions towards women and so many subversive forms of oppression that are just built into our structures and systems that, so many people, including you, don't do it with malintent. It's just the impact. So when I say to you, ouch, that really hurts, I can imagine that you want to say, oh my gosh, I didn't mean to. But that's not the point, right? Like, oh, you've been hurt. Primary freaking thing to pay attention. You have been hurt.
Right.
Not freaking what you meant to say or do. We can get to that later because it is also nice to know that you weren't trying to be mean, but like that's not the point, y'all. It's that there was hurt. Let's tend to the bleeding wound before we get to the defensiveness.
Right.
And so she says, it's not about intent, it's about impact. That's a pretty simple thing to say in response to that when a lot could have been said.
Yeah.
And so, Rachel Lindsay, the first and only black bachelor or bachelorette, and Becca Kufrin, Garrett's fiance, have a podcast together called Bachelor Happy Hour or something like that. And they start to talk about it, and they both are agreeing that they come from different places and they have different understanding. But Rachel Lindsay says the hardest thing about that whole podcast was not that we had difference of opinion. That was actually pretty cool. It was that Becca kept saying he didn't mean anything by it. He didn't mean anything by it, defending that stance. And so it doesn't really get you anywhere. So I say to you in the car, and I say, I've got a question for you that I've been holding until now.
Okay.
Okay?
I'm ready for
Which is, and let me see if I can kind of remember it, which is, so, as a white man in the patriarchal society that we come from, that we exist in now,
Mm-hmm.
It is my understanding that you are taught to know everything. That it's assumed that you know a lot.
Mm-hmm.
You are supposed to know what direction we're driving in at all times, like
Mm-hmm.
where we're going and how to get there.
Yes.
You're supposed to be taking care of me and perceptive to any threat to danger.
Mm-hmm.
You're supposed to be understanding a lot about life and answer all my questions. You're supposed to take care of me emotionally and know exactly what to say when I am in emotional need or distress. And it's just like, the pressures on you are so great to have it all figured out that of course white men are out there going, well, yeah, let me tell you about it. And this whole concept of mansplaining and also just this need to speak up and have it right. And I'm like, at what point are you like, how to get the message across that it's okay to not know everything and you can let down and listen more than you speak, and B, what do you think it's going to take to be vulnerable enough to be like, whoa, I don't really know anything about this topic. Not you specific, of course, but like you. The collective white man you.
So what is repeat the specific question for me, because there's a lot there. So you say what's it going to take
for you and the collective white male experience to not feel like they need to jump in with their opinions. You hear so many, I'll explain. You hear so many people saying, I'm just listening right now. I'm listening, I'm learning, I'm reading, I'm researching. And then you still hear a bunch of white men going, well, let me tell you about this thin blue line, or let me tell you how it is. Let me just explain to you. Not, everybody matters. It's not just the black lives.
Yeah.
Let me explain to you.
Yeah.
And it's like, and that's been, I think what the question is like, that has been fed to you that you should know everything. Like you literally are massacred when you don't know. That's not a good example, but like you're torn down emotionally and physically when you don't know where you're going, what you're doing, how to do it. Thank you for listening.
Yeah, well, thank you for that question. I think, I would, before I kind of get into what I think is your central question, which is, how does that begin to shift? Because there's a lot of answers to that, and probably a lot of valid answers to that. But, I think from what you are pointing out, which is something I don't know if we've talked in a podcast, which I appreciate that you're pointing out in the way that it's not often talked about in terms of how the patriarchal systems, victims of patriarchal systems are most definitely, women, communities of color, and especially women of color. And we could go down kind of the list of that.
The ones that are oppressed.
The ones that are oppressed. And victims of patriarchy are men.
Also, why white people are victims of white supremacy, because it doesn't help anyone.
Right. And so, I think that's actually part of being able to heal that.
It doesn't help anyone, it hurts everyone. Okay, go ahead.
Are being able to heal that, and being able to educate, particularly men, on the ways that patriarchal structures, that they are, we are also trained to believe that we are benefiting from that, and
you are benefiting monetarily and in some ways, but you're right. I mean, this is the nuance of it, is it really is hurting everyone.
It very much is. And, we're like, I think that's a big part of it. And that's a key understanding, that our lives are oppressed because of the way that the patriarchy is impacting us. So how does it change? I mean, I think, and how do men become more vulnerable, which is also kind of what you asked. I think part of it is, that's a big ship to turn around. And one of the things that kind of comes into my mind is, this is why it's so very crucial that we have particularly women, and especially women of color, black women, brown women, who are in positions of power. And we begin to rewrite a narrative around ability, decision-making ability, because the one that is dominant in our culture right now is that the best decision makers, we're taught this in history, and we're taught this in multimedia, and we're taught this, have been and will be men.
But weren't we just talking with some friends the other day about the fact that, like, put a woman in, like, the presidency as it currently is, and they're just going to act like the president?
I mean, I think we have to kind of wait and see on that one. I agree, and then you're getting back to the conversation around structure there.
Around
like
Reformation
versus
right,
abolition. And, maybe to a certain degree, but I also think that there's, we also have women leaders around the world who have handled the coronavirus pandemic much more effectively than their male counterparts.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that those type of things, I still think there are only, I think out of the top 500 Fortune 500 companies, there's only maybe less than 5 are women CEOs, less than that.
I think we know one of them.
And potentially, and it's just like, yeah. I mean, it's a big question, right? It's a big question, and I do not hide my feelings around my calling and desire to smash the patriarchy and understanding my role as a white man in doing so. When we talk about, well, what is the solution? One thing that I'll point out is, like, I just gave, some rambly thoughts on what is the solution, but one thing that I firmly believe, and we were having this conversation, is that the path towards change requires a full spectrum of different types of action. It requires men, showing up in their homes or like daily lives. And it also requires massive, like, policy change, whatever that may be. I mean, it requires this whole spectrum of actions. And each action is important in its own right. But what is the whole critical piece to shifting an entire system, or a structure like patriarchy, is that each one of those actions and the people that are doing those are standing and working in solidarity with the other people doing actions. And what I mean by that is that, like, the people who are, we'll take the people who are, let's take an environmental example, because, like, environmental action is, a lot of people are familiar with that. The person who is just planting their own garden in their backyard as a form of action to support the environment. And then the person who's chaining themselves to a tree, or, like, standing on a front line to stop a pipeline, or doing some direct action.
Or to you that's in other countries doing policy work.
Or the person trying to do policy work. Like, each one of those people are in solidarity and supporting that other action. Because often what inhibits change is people doing different types. As long as the vision is the same, as long as we're agreeing that this is the world that we're working towards, one where we don't have this, let's say, patriarchal overlord kind of like patriarchal structure, whatever action that you're taking is beautiful. And one of the most important actions that you can take is supporting other people taking action, whatever form that may be. Not trying to convince them to do this or this or this. Now, if they need suggestions, certainly provide that. But if they feel like they're taking an action, I firmly believe this, that you must stand in solidarity with them. And by standing in solidarity, by receiving support, if I'm just doing the littlest thing, if I start getting positively affirmed for doing that by people within the movement, it makes me want to take a step further. It makes me want to up my level of action, right? We need to reward action instead of use shame to say you need to be doing more. Now, that's really tricky, because in certain ways we do need to, like when there's pressure people around urgency.
Or when people aren't making that forward, like they're kind of content to just do the bare minimum, and they aren't actually having that internal kind of desire to grow.
And I recognize that and appreciate that.
But you're mostly right. I mean, that's the truth. That's more important. The positive reinforcement is much more important than there are going to be instances where some pressure is needed. But let me just ask you, and I'm not trying to dumb this down because I very much appreciated everything that you said. I felt very touched by it. That's why I held your hand. I'm just like, I'm very touched by it. Should Becca and Garrett break up? Like, should Becca end the relationship?
Without really knowing them.
These are the Bachelor people we're talking about here.
I just don't think.
I think he's not evolving. I think the whole time she was much more evolved. That's what we all saw. She felt connected to him because he felt like home. And at the end of the day, like, if Hillary versus Trump is a big freaking difference. We've got some very serious Republicans in our lives who could not get down with Trump and who did not like Hillary but chose her because of their values. That's a big divide there.
Yeah,
it's not political at that point. It's like it is about all the movements.
Yeah.
And then if anybody has anything to add, we'd love to hear.
I personally think that she should leave him, but what's coming up for me right now is
because I was proud of them for working out that.
Love is a powerful thing too.
Mm-hmm. And I felt that,
and I don't want to say that in the sense of like
their first snafu,
Yeah, and I don't want to say that in terms of like, there is. Like love conquers all,
or abuse or anything.
Yeah, exactly. No. But it's if they're truly in love, like it's interesting. But like I don't think that she's gonna, there are certain, and this gets back to our original conversation around like the foundation and values, right? Like, and if his values are this, like it feels like they're just existing within a relationship in order that is fun and that is attractive and that but like one comment we constantly say on this. Go ahead.
What's the one comment? No. Oh, come on. What's the one?
Well, I'm just saying, like, if you're not growing spiritually with the person, then what the heck are you doing? Yeah. And I just don't see them reaching that level.
Right, and I think spiritually is different for everybody, and I think they do grow spirit. The thing is that like this is the most interesting divide because I'm watching really close friends struggle right now. Really close friends, like, or even for example, like there's Bachelor happy hour, how fun, and then all of a sudden you've got Rachel Lindsay who just so happens to be black, and then you've got Becca Kufrin who's got this fiance who has this like weird history with white supremacist cultural things, and you've got, and then they just so happen to be doing this like the happy hour where they talk to all the Bachelor people and it's all goofy and fun, and then shit gets really real. And we are at a really interesting time where like all of a sudden it's like we've been able to kind of navigate those relationship differences, like, oh, there's a little political difference here and there, but like these are so foundational. Yeah. This is no longer like it's no longer simple.
It's the moral high ground, and you're not there's so much information and visual kind of like representation of these things out in the world, like you can't avoid it.
But I wonder how many people are
especially within your relationship, and shame on you if you are avoiding it. Mm-hmm. We talked about that last time. I
wonder how many people are going to like lose friends. I mean, I think COVID's doing it too, to be completely honest.
Mm-hmm. In what ways?
The anti-vax community, mm-hmm. and the like fake news, like I think the fake news folks were never really like, they were kind of already in different camps, but I think it's the anti-vax, which is a very I would say, if I had to guess, it's a very white bread, women-led movement, and I'm not sharing an opinion on it because I have had really my fair share of difficulty in the medical system, and I tend to kind of go the like natural meets Western medicine balance. We try to do that balance, but the anti-vaxxers. I mean, it's separating,
Yeah.
it's separating, people because it's.
So here's a question, and we might need to wrap up soon, but like, is this?
If anybody has anything they want to share, feel free to share.
Yeah.
Or a question you want to ask.
Yeah.
I mean, it's been such a hot topic.
Yeah, I mean, how, like, I feel like, how do we, as a society, like, how does everybody begin to embrace change? Like, how do we transition and change? Because I think it really feels in this moment like, a lot of layers of the onion are peeling back, and more rapidly than they ever have before.
I have an answer.
And let me just set up the question a little bit more. That, and I think part of it is that, like, change is really difficult for people. It's even hard on a micro level.
It's hard for everybody.
It's hard for everybody. And when you're talking about big systematic changes that have been constants in people's lives, whether good or bad, no matter the relationship with them that the individual has, when you talk about a lot of different change all at once, whether or not that change is for the better, it's really, really difficult for people. And so I think part of, the work right now is helping our society cope with change.
Okay. So, two things.
How do we do that?
Yeah. So, we're like kind of the biggest changes right now around COVID and around anti-racism and white supremacy. And, on the one hand, you've got like, I'll use myself as an example.
Mm-hmm.
I had health problems that were so confusing to me, and I was trying to figure them out. And it honestly wasn't until I got cancer that I made the most significant changes. So, and I hear about this as a therapist and in different like groups that I'm in, it's like it really is that rock bottom.
Mm-hmm.
And so the issue around the anti-racism and the white supremacist work is that some white people will shelter themselves from hitting rock bottom.
Mm-hmm.
And we can't all be hitting our rock bottom at the same time, although we're being invited to in many ways right now. And which is the unique thing. And then you think about how people deal with change.
Mm-hmm.
And so what we're talking about is like, how prepared are we for grief? And when you said how to help people cope with change, we're really talking about grief. So if you think about the 5 stages of grief, which honestly, I don't know why I don't really know the order, but like, isn't it shock? And then it's bargaining.
You're the one with the master's degree in social
and I
work,
should know that. I mean, I should know this. Tamara, Hannah, I'm so sorry that I don't know the 5 stages of grief. You're like, that's 101. But I think first you go into shock, and then you go into maybe, I don't know, but the stages in no particular order are like shock and denial.
Yeah.
And bargaining, and then anger.
Mm.
And then maybe the last is to kind of, it's probably sadness. It's probably sadness, yeah.
Mm-hmm.
And so, if you think about everybody's in some stage of that, like they're either in shock, which means they're dissociated and we talked to a friend the other day about her breaking her arm like this, like crooked, and she's like, I didn't feel anything. And it's like, we go into shock, which is a great tool for dealing with change.
Right, and those are people who are just like, I don't care, I'm not watching the news, it doesn't matter.
Yeah, and they're just like so overwhelmed by it. And then you've got folks in denial, and you've got some that are bargaining, like, okay, if only, like, let me try to do it this way, and I won't have to deal with it, or like, let me try to like position myself in this.
This is a great example, yeah.
Yeah, and then because it is grief, change is grief.
Yeah.
I mean, we have lost so much for better and for worse, right? Like, but also in a lot of ways for better.
Yeah.
And then you've got the bargaining, but then you've got the denial of like, like, no, it's not really happening, and then you've got angers, and you've got people who are just straight up pissed.
Right.
And so everybody's in this state, or sad, and everybody's in a stage of grief, and we really are not prepared in the Western culture to grieve. Nobody teaches you about grief. You hide dead bodies in coffins. You don't tell people when the pet dies, oh, it ran away. Like, nobody talks about grief and death and sadness, and then so nobody's prepared for it, and definitely not on a scale this large.
Yeah.
So we
That's
didn't
really wise,
didn't do the work. We're like, everything's okay, and then it's like falling apart. And yeah, so there's some comments coming in, but I think that we should have done a better job of preparing for grief. I mean, so many other cultures talk about death and grief.
Yeah.
So what's coming up for me is that binary thinking in itself is a weapon of supremacy and used as a tool to divide us. Meaning binary thinking is, it's black and white. It's like it's either this or that. We have to look at a full spectrum of action systems and ideas instead of just pitting two extremes against each other, like black or white, male or female, etc.
Yep.
There are so many layers.
Yep. I feel that. I mean, and this is why, like, these are complex issues that are deeply ingrained and require complex solutions, which one of the
Here, just take it from me, my love.
Got it. I thought you were trying to show me something.
I am.
Yeah, these are complex issues that like have like complex solutions, and one of the things where I think, and Zoe, I appreciate the comment, like the binary thinking gets into difficulty, or like I struggle with, is when you try to have a conversation and maybe move somebody along a spectrum of learning and understanding, is they're like, well, what do we do about it? What's the solution? And what they're kind of asking for is this, like, well, A plus B equals C solution. And it's a great tactic used by somebody on an opposing side to box you in, because oftentimes we don't have answers to all of these issues. We don't have all the answers, but it's really critical to identify the problem.
So there's a couple more comments. So about Hillary versus Trump, it's like, what does it represent? Good versus evil, or what do people kind of label them as? And so it's like constantly this. I mean, even like Democrat versus Republican, it's constantly this dichotomy, this binary.
Yeah. We've got another one here. Says simple. We are all the same. We are all a human race. And then another one. Division makes us weak. A team accomplishes a lot. Any thoughts on that?
You have some.
I mean, I think in terms of like the human race comment, like scientifically speaking, we are all the same species, and from that perspective, it's weird that we segregate each other, because we're all the same DNA. I think the issue with that, though, is that is lacking. It is not acknowledging. There is no acknowledgement in that statement that the way that certain people in our society are being treated is it's dismissive. That statement is dismissive against people, the black and brown and people of color in our society who are being systematically oppressed by the kind of systems and structures and powers that be. And so, like, while that may be true, that is also not necessarily the conversation that we're having right now.
Or that the answer isn't as simple. Division makes us weak. A team accomplishes a lot and makes us strong. It's true. So we have to all bind together. That we have to all bind together on the same team, like you were talking about with the environmental movement. It's like, to plant a garden in your backyard is as meaningful as putting yourself in front of a pipeline, which is as meaningful as changing policy. We just have to acknowledge where we're starting from. And so we can't, we can't assume that everybody feels as though they are equal at this point.
And I think part of the issue, like part of the difficulty that people have with that is that the way that let's say like the policing system, which we started this conversation on, is set up right now, is giving people privileges that whether they recognize or they don't recognize. Myself as a white male, or white people in general receive privileges. So changing that system, there is a perceived threat, not an actual threat, but a perceived threat that some of these privileges that I haven't fully processed, as a white person, maybe not fully processed, would be taken away. Same thing with men and the patriarchy. If when actually what we're working for is equality, but sometimes equality means that, the way that you're having to release certain powers that you have to, there's a let go of power there. And that is very difficult because it's easy to say we should all be on the same page when you're in kind of the position of power, right? And it's much, it's just that.
Well, and
so,
everybody is in agreement that everybody counts. Like that's the goal. Like I will end by saying like this woman that we saw kind of explaining from her perspective as a Black woman, why she feels the way she feels about the protests, about the fires, about the burning buildings down, about everything that's going on, about this uprising, this revolution, and she's explaining it like a Monopoly game around wealth and acquisition of both wealth and resource and property. And then at the end she just says, maybe you'll remember the line better than me, the last line.
Well, she basically says, it doesn't, if the target burns.
No. So the very last line when she says,
I don't remember. Go for it.
Where she says, and people should be grateful that Black folks aren't looking for
or working for equality
and not looking for revenge.
Right.
And it's like, that we are all in agreement that equality is the final outcome, that it is that simple. We are all human and we are all part of humankind, that is the outcome we are wanting. It's just we got a long way to go.
Yeah. And if that's the vision, then it gets back to my point around standing in solidarity with all the different types of actions that are taken on, that there's no, that they're all very valid, and that by supporting each other and standing in solidarity, we actually encourage people to take a next step of action.
Yeah, I definitely want to continue to encourage people to take a next step of action.
Yeah.
The reason of the human race is to help in not having. Comment. Yeah, the reason of the human race is to help in not having prejudice. Mm-hmm. To kind of get rid of all of that, and then we have to examine trauma from the beginning, and I completely agree. It's crazy. Yeah. Thank you all for listening. Thank you all for participating. What a blessing to be a part of this conversation with you all, and keep the conversation going. That is the name of our tour this year, even though we are touring from home.
That's right. All right.
Blessings.
Thanks for the conversation, babe.
Love you.
Bye.